My name is Brent Howlett, and today I'll be discussing with you a critical case comparison of two emergency management events. Those are Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War. First, we're going to look at the evolving emergency management situations of each event. We're going to discuss the anticipation, the response, and the mitigation of the United States and Pearl Harbor, and for Israel and the Yom Kippur War. Then we'll look into the leadership of both FDR and the Prime Minister of Israel. And then we'll look at the strategic platform and the communication plan. And then we'll make a comparison at the end between the two events, kind of explaining some simulators and some differences, which is the critical case comparison portion of this presentation. All right, so first we're going to start out with Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor is an attack December 7th, 1941, with the Japanese attacking the Pacific Fleet in Hawaii. So we're looking at the anticipation leading up to the attack. So the United States overlooked many critical leads pointing to a potential attack from Japan. It starts out with the economic sanctions that the United States imposed on the Empire of Japan. This limited Japan's ability to purchase and export materials from the United States. This was particularly an issue because the Japanese relied on the United States completely for oil. So without this oil, it made the country weaker. And Japanese leaders viewed the sanctions, little distinction between the sanctions and actual warfare, because if they don't have the oil to fight in World War II, they become weaker as a nation. So that was a huge issue leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now let's take a look at the United States' response to the attack on Pearl Harbor. So FDR responded within hours of hearing about the attack and he actually addressed Congress within a few hours of the attack. And this is with his famous "A Date Which Will Live in Infamy" speech, where Congress subsequently declared war on the Empire of Japan. So we have to look at as a whole the United States. The United States mobilized the whole economy for war production. They banded together to allocate resources and to sustain our military in the upcoming war. Now let's remember, most Americans opposed the war in Europe. They viewed it as a European problem, and as long as it was stayed over there, then it wasn't really an American problem. So this has obviously changed after the attacks on Pearl Harbor. So one thing that was interesting about the response from the United States was a lot of countries may have just gone back and attacked the country who attacked them. That wasn't the case with the United States. They prepared to attack Germany because Germany was the main threat in Europe at the time. Germany had taken over many other European countries, and the United States feared the industry, the fast-moving industry in Germany, wherein they were focusing on making biological, chemical, and weapons of mass destruction. And that was what the United States wanted to avoid. Let's look at some of the mitigation factors involved in the American response to this attack. So within minutes of the first wave of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Fleet was devastated. They lost over 180 airplanes, and there's about 3,400 casualties. We could look at responding to such a crisis like that. It's going to be a daunting task. The United States immediately started repairs on the ships that could be repaired. All around the country, factories were popping up to repair all these ships, and there was actually units made within the government specifically to repair the ships from the Pacific Fleet to get them back out there and into the fight. So they prioritized the damage of the ships and decided which ships could get back quicker than others and worked on those ships, and eventually was able to recover a large portion of the ships lost in Pearl Harbor. Some of the same ships about to be lost to Pearl Harbor were actually repaired and actually used on D-Day in 1944. And they actually joined the bombarding of the Japanese naval forces near the turning point of World War II. Next, I want to talk about the leadership of FDR. He's a revered leader, and for good reason. Aside from suffering from polio and dealing with the Great Depression, he also had World War II to actually deal with. And so he demonstrated extreme resolve and judgment after receiving news about the attacks on Pearl Harbor. The president's quick response in addressing the country demonstrated the president's ability to present a united front on the world stage. You could tell he was passionate in his speech and that he was hurting as well. And he wanted to get back out there, get back into the fight, which I think one of the most important sites when we look at the speech earlier in the class. We looked at it on YouTube and kind of wrote a paper about it as well. And it was an amazing speech for that reason. So the president during the event was required to sort through a series of conflicting and incomplete, inaccurate reports because when he received word of the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was actually still occurring. So to turn his attention away from this attack and to immediately go back and address and deliver a speech to Congress and the rest of the United States, it was was a great demonstration of his resolve and his judgment, because he knew the United States had to get back out there, had to put up a front to the rest of the world, let them know that we were not defeated. FDR's speech served two purposes. It wanted to urge Congress to formally declare war on Japan, and which it did minutes later, and it was to rally the American people to support the war effort. All right, next, let's look at the strategic platform. So Pearl Harbor was the ideal target for Japan. The attack on the United States Pacific Fleet would severely limit America's ability to make war on Japan. In addition, by taking the Pacific Fleet out of the fight, Japan can eventually become a superpower in the Pacific and obtain their oil from Indonesia. So that was another aspect of getting rid of the United States. If you were to impose sanctions on the country and they can't get oil from the United States, the other way of doing that is to take the United States out of the equation. So the United States misjudged Japanese capabilities and suffered multiple intelligence failures leading up to the attack. Majority of the United States, the government intelligence agencies, believed that Hawaii was out of reach of Japanese vessels, and they believed that Philippines or Guam were more likely targets. In addition, the United States strategic intelligence was not up to date, and it didn't account for any Japanese technological improvements, which proved to be fatal. In addition, majority of U.S. intelligence came from radio intelligence and breaking codes. Intelligence told them the Japanese were moving south, and hostilities were likely to be soon, but Pearl Harbor was not listed as the target. All right, let's look at the communication plan. The United States tracked incoming aircraft, and they believed obviously it was a group of birds or B-22s coming in from the mainland. And they also discovered a foreign submarine at the entrance of Pearl Harbor, but yet that was still ignored. The U.S. naval ship relayed the information back to the command center, but it was dismissed. And obviously that's a critical communication error on behalf of the United States. Hours before the attack, naval officials in Washington also sent a message to commanders at Pearl Harbor advising them of an imminent attack on Japan, and the message sent back was not properly marked as urgent, and therefore it wasn't read. So that's also a major intelligence failure, wherein preemptive strike could have been mounted beforehand if they would have received this letter. All right, we have to remember, FDR received word of this attack while it was still occurring, and there was no contingency plan for a massive attack on the Pacific Fleet. Okay, next we're going to look at the emergency management situation for the Yom Kippur War. This is a war that occurred in 1973 between Israel, Egypt, and Syrian forces. So Egyptian forces and Syrian forces launched a surprise attack on Israel during the Day of Atonement, which is a Jewish holiday. Let's look at the emergency management situation. So the anticipation leading up to Yom Kippur was the 6-Day War. This is also called the Arab-Israeli War. This is where Egypt and Israel were engaged in war, and it was a massive win for Israeli forces. The 6-Day War led to a false sense of security amongst the whole entire Israeli population. Golda Meir was the prime minister of Israel during the 6-Day War and the subsequent Yom Kippur War. She was criticized for not having a military mind or very political type of leader. And although there was a mounting frustration between Egypt and Israel, Golda Meir believed that they could anticipate an attack from Egypt at least 48 hours ahead of time due to the success they had during the 6-Day War. Ultimately, Israel failed to anticipate that attack due to intelligence failures and the belief that the enemy did not have the capabilities to mount an attack against a superior military. Now let's look at some of the leadership issues throughout the Yom Kippur War. So Prime Minister Golda Meir received word of an imminent attack from her Minister of Defense, Moshe Dayan, hours before the attack took place. There was no preemptive strike ordered, and the issue was that the Prime Minister was in fear of being accused of starting a war. That's why she did not mount any kind of preemptive attack. Instead, the Prime Minister mobilized reserve units to supplement forces in case of an attack. So she made the decision to call up reserve units 6 hours earlier, and that's kind of insufficient time to mount such a defense against Egyptian and Syrian forces. So there was a chain of failures, whether it was political, military, a lot of complacency on behalf of Golda Meir and the Israeli military. All right, next we're going to look at the strategic platform. Israel was attacked from the north and the south. Syria attacking from north, and Egyptian forces attacking from the south. The Israeli defense forces suffered massive casualties. And an interesting fact about this was that the defense minister received word of a potential attack around 6 o'clock in the evening. The decision to mobilize wasn't until 8 o'clock the next morning. This is really unique because there was so much time to react, and the Israeli government decided not to act, which ultimately led to the amount of casualties inflicted on the reserve units. All right, next one, look at the communication, which obviously the whole apparatus failed for the Israeli military, wherein the Egyptian and Syrian intentions were clearly observed, but they were disregarded. This is obviously a recurring theme looking back at Pearl Harbor as well. The U.S. warned Israel of an imminent attack due to unusual military movements by the Egyptian and Syrian militaries towards the Israeli border. It was actionable intelligence to move on, but it was disregarded. In addition, the Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat communicated his intentions in speeches and through various media outlets. It got to the point where Anwar Sadat told Palestinian guerrillas that to prepare themselves because we were going to war. All right, lastly, we're going to talk about the comparisons between both events, Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War. So those are glaring comparisons between the two. So one of the main comparisons was there was a belief that the adversary did not possess the capabilities to successfully execute an attack. So it was underestimation of the enemy. That's something that was done by the United States and the Japanese and Israeli forces and the Egyptians and the Syrians. Next is the false sense of security, where both the United States and Israel believed that the defense they currently had would be in place would be enough to fight off any attackers. Next is the lack of preparedness. So the overconfidence of both countries kind of led to the lack of preparedness, wherein they didn't believe that a lesser military would attack a superior power. Next was in both attacks, there were talks of peace. So the United States was speaking to Japan about talks of peace, and Israel was speaking to Egypt and Syria for talks of peace. Next was critical intelligence. It was obtained, but it wasn't passed. In both Pearl Harbor and the Yom Kippur War, intelligence was received by both countries that could have maybe gave enough time to mount a defense against the attack. In Yom Kippur, the intelligence was in the form of an officer who sent a report titled War Preparations for the Egyptian Army. And for Pearl Harbor, it came in the form of the urgent letter from Washington, D.C. that was not marked urgent, and therefore it wasn't read. And next was the drastic leadership differences between President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Golda Meir. President Roosevelt's response turned a crisis into a means of national pride and military support, although they lost the Battle of Pearl Harbor. For Yom Kippur War, Israel too suffered massive casualties, but they ultimately won the war. So on one hand, we have the United States obviously losing the battle at Pearl Harbor, but turning into a positive. But then you have Prime Minister Golda Meir winning the Yom Kippur War, and it being turned into a negative because of her response, and eventually she stepped down. The case comparison demonstrated how leaders' ability to show fortitude in response to a tragic event could ultimately benefit or adversely affect an entire nation. Again, thank you for your time for the case comparison. I look forward to hearing your responses. Thank you.